In Vermont's rural towns, everyone knows everyone. Trust isn't just a courtesy, it's survival. In Stowe, with only 4,000 residents, Dr. Michael Brennan was the heart of the community. When Claire Hartley disappeared in 1998, the doctor comforted her family, helped police, and raised money for a memorial service. 26 years later, when Vermont State Police knocked on Dr. Brennan's door, no one could believe it, because in his hands were not just the first breaths of babies, but the last breath of a young woman. And the town learned, in the most painful way, how trust can become a weapon. December 18, 1998. The Green Mountains surrounding Stowe, Vermont were blanketed in fresh snow, the kind that makes the whole world look clean and innocent. Main Street was decorated with garlands and white lights for the holidays. The town's small businesses, family-owned restaurants, ski rental shops, and the single pharmacy stayed open late to catch last-minute Christmas shoppers. At the center of town, in a modest two-story building with a hand-painted sign reading Stowe Family Medicine, Dr. Michael Brennan was finishing his last appointment of the day. Dr. Brennan was 54 years old, a fixture in Stowe for 3 decades. He'd arrived fresh out of medical school in 1968, a young idealist drawn to Vermont's progressive values and tight-knit communities. He delivered half the babies in town, set broken bones from skiing accidents, diagnosed everything from strep throat to cancer, and held the hands of elderly patients as they took their final breaths. He was more than a doctor. He was a confessor, a counselor, a trusted friend. When people in Stowe had problems, medical or otherwise, they went to Dr. Brennan. He was a tall man, just over 6 feet, with salt and pepper hair that had once been jet black, wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a scholarly appearance, and a gentle voice that put patients at ease. He wore the same thing every day: khaki pants, a button-down shirt, and a white medical coat with his name embroidered in blue thread. He lived alone in a Victorian house on Mountain Road, never married, though he'd been engaged once in his 20s to a woman who'd left him for someone else. That heartbreak, people said, had made him even more devoted to his patients. His practice was his family. On that December evening, his last patient was Claire Hartley, 19 years old, home from her first semester at the University of Vermont in Burlington. Claire had grown up in Stowe, graduated from Stowe High School the previous spring, and was majoring in environmental science. She was the only child of Robert and Linda Hartley, who owned a small bed and breakfast on the edge of town. Claire was bright, outdoorsy, the kind of Vermont girl who could ski double black diamonds and identify every native plant species. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's easy smile. Claire had made an appointment that afternoon, complaining of a persistent sore throat and fatigue. Her mother had insisted she see Dr. Brennan before the holidays. "You know how he gets booked up," Linda had said. "Better to go now than wait until you're really sick." The appointment was scheduled for 5:30 p.m., the last slot of the day. Claire arrived 10 minutes early, signing in with Jenny Morrison, Dr. Brennan's receptionist and office manager for 15 years. Jenny noted the time in the logbook: 5:20 p.m. Claire wore jeans, hiking boots, and a green fleece jacket with the University of Vermont logo. She carried a small backpack and was reading a paperback novel while she waited. At 5:28 p.m., Dr. Brennan opened the door to the waiting room and smiled. "Claire, good to see you. How's college treating you?" His voice was warm, familiar. Claire had been his patient since she was 6 years old. He'd given her vaccinations, treated her childhood illnesses, written her a recommendation letter for college applications. "It's great, Dr. Brennan," Claire replied, standing and following him down the hallway to examination room 2. "Just this throat thing that won't go away." Jenny Morrison gathered her coat and purse. "Dr. Brennan called out from the examination room, 'You can head home, Jenny. I'll lock up after Claire.'" "You sure?" Jenny asked. It was their standard routine. Dr. Brennan often stayed late, catching up on paperwork. Absolutely. Have a good evening. Say hi to Tom and the kids. Jenny left at 5:35 p.m., her departure captured by the small security camera above the front door. The camera, installed after a break-in attempt 2 years earlier, showed Jenny walking to her car, getting in, and driving away. The timestamp read 5:37 p.m. when her taillights disappeared from view. That was the last time anyone saw Claire Hartley alive. When Claire didn't come home by 7 p.m., Linda Hartley called her daughter's cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Linda wasn't immediately worried. Claire was 19, an adult, probably stopped to see high school friends. But by 8 p.m., when Claire still hadn't returned any calls, Linda's concern deepened. She called Dr. Brennan's office. No answer. She called his home. The phone rang and rang. At 8:45 p.m., Robert Hartley drove to Dr. Brennan's office on Main Street. The building was dark, doors locked. Claire's car, a 10-year-old Subaru Outback, was not in the parking lot. Robert walked around the building, peering in windows, looking for any sign of life. Nothing. He drove home and called the Stowe Police Department. Officer Dale Jensen took the call. Stowe's police department consisted of a chief and 3 officers. Most of their work involved minor traffic violations, the occasional drunk tourist, and helping elderly residents with snow removal. Missing persons cases were exceptionally rare. But Officer Jensen knew Claire. He'd been her Little League coach when she was 9. She probably went to see friends in Burlington, Jensen told Robert, trying to be reassuring. You know how kids are. They lose track of time. Claire's not like that, Robert insisted. She always calls. And her car isn't here. Something's wrong. Jensen agreed to file a report and said he'd drive around town, checking the usual spots where young people gathered. By 10 p.m., he'd found nothing. Claire's car wasn't at any friend's house, not at the ski resort parking lot, not at any of the bars or restaurants in town. At 10:30 p.m., Officer Jensen knocked on Dr. Brennan's door. The doctor answered in flannel pajamas and a bathrobe, looking concerned and slightly confused. Dale? What's wrong? Sorry to bother you so late, Doc. Claire Hartley's parents are worried. She had an appointment with you this evening and didn't come home. Did she mention where she might be going after? Dr. Brennan's face registered appropriate concern. Claire? Yes, she was here around 5:30. Just a routine exam, sore throat. I diagnosed her with a mild case of pharyngitis, gave her a prescription for antibiotics, and sent her on her way. That was around, 6 o'clock or so. She seemed fine, said she was going straight home. You didn't notice which direction she drove when she left? I'm afraid not. I was in my office doing paperwork. I assume she went home. Is everything all right? Jensen explained that Claire hadn't arrived home and her parents couldn't reach her. Dr. Brennan's concern appeared genuine. That's not like Claire at all. She's a responsible girl. Have you checked with her friends? Maybe she stopped somewhere? Working on it, Jensen replied. If you think of anything else, give me a call. Of course. I hope she turns up soon. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. By midnight, the Hartley family was in full panic mode. Linda called every friend whose number she had. None had seen Claire. Robert drove the route from the doctor's office to their home 3 times, looking for any sign of an accident, a car in a ditch, anything. Nothing. At 1:15 a.m., the decision was made to contact Vermont State Police. This was now a missing persons investigation. Detective Sarah Winters arrived in Stowe at 3 a.m. She was based in Waterbury, about 10 miles south, and specialized in missing persons cases. Winters was 38, a 12-year veteran of the state police, and knew Vermont's mountains and forests could swallow people without a trace. Every year, hikers got lost, skiers went off-trail and vanished, hunters didn't come home. Most were found eventually, alive or dead. But some never were. The first 48 hours of any missing persons case are critical. Winters assembled what little information existed. Claire had been seen at 5:20 p.m. by Jenny Morrison at Dr. Brennan's office. Dr. Brennan claimed she'd left around 6 p.m. After that, nothing. No credit card usage, no ATM withdrawals, no cell phone activity. Claire's phone last pinged off a tower in Stowe at 5:52 p.m., then went dead. Either the battery had died or the phone had been turned off. By dawn on December 19th, search teams were being organized. Vermont State Police brought in search and rescue volunteers, the local fire department, and dozens of community members who knew Claire and wanted to help. Dr. Brennan was among the first to volunteer. He showed up at the Search Command Center, set up in the parking lot of Stowe Elementary School, at 7 a.m. "I feel terrible," he told Detective Winters. "Claire was just in my office. If I'd known she was in any kind of danger, I would have insisted on calling her parents, making sure she got home safely. Is there anything I can do?" Winters appreciated the doctor's concern but had to ask routine questions. "Dr. Brennan, can you walk me through Claire's visit one more time? Every detail, no matter how small." They sat in Winters' patrol car, heater running against the morning cold. Dr. Brennan recounted the appointment methodically. Claire had arrived complaining of a sore throat and fatigue. He'd examined her, looked at her throat with a tongue depressor, felt her lymph nodes, took her temperature, 99.2 degrees, slightly elevated, and diagnosed a mild bacterial infection. He'd written a prescription for amoxicillin, told her to rest and drink fluids, and walked her to the front door. The whole appointment took maybe 20 minutes. Did she seem upset about anything? Distracted? Worried? Winters asked. Not at all. She was cheerful, told me about her classes at UVM, said she was enjoying Burlington but missed Stowe. We talked about her environmental science major. She was excited about a forestry course she was taking. Everything seemed completely normal. And you're certain she left the office? Absolutely. I walked her to the door, watched her walk down the front step. She got into her car, a Subaru, greenish color I think. She waved, and I went back inside to finish some paperwork. It was a straightforward account, entirely plausible, and Dr. Brennan's demeanor was appropriately concerned. Winters had no reason to doubt him. The doctor was a pillar of the community, someone beyond suspicion. The working theory became that something had happened to Claire after she left the medical office, perhaps on her drive home. Search teams spread out across Stowe and surrounding areas. The route from Dr. Brennan's office to the Hartley's bed and breakfast was only 2 miles, mostly along Mountain Road. Volunteers walked both sides of the road, looking for any sign of Claire's car, any indication she'd pulled over or crashed. The heavy snow from the previous night had covered any potential tracks, but searchers looked anyway, hoping for a clue. Dr. Brennan joined a search team that focused on the wooded areas near his office. He walked alongside Robert Hartley, offering quiet words of comfort. We'll find her, Robert. I know this is terrifying, but Claire's a smart girl. If she's out there, she'll find a way to signal us. Robert, grief-stricken and exhausted, gripped the doctor's arm. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for everything you're doing. The search continued for 5 days. Hundreds of volunteers combed through forests, checked abandoned buildings, followed every trail and logging road within a 10-mile radius. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew over the mountains, looking for heat signatures. Divers checked the frozen streams and ponds. Nothing was found. No trace of Claire, no sign of her car, no evidence of where she'd gone. On December 23rd, a local news crew from Burlington arrived to cover the story. Dr. Brennan was interviewed on camera, standing in front of his medical office. Claire Hartley is a wonderful young woman, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. She has her whole life ahead of her. Our community is devastated by her disappearance. We're praying for her safe return and asking anyone with information to please come forward. The interview aired that evening on the 6 p.m. news. Thousands of Vermonters saw Dr. Brennan's anguished face, heard his plea. It reinforced what everyone in Stowe already knew. The doctor cared deeply about his patients and his community. Christmas came and went. The Hartley household was silent, no decorations, no celebration. Linda sat by the phone, hoping for a call. Robert continued to search, driving around aimlessly, unable to accept that his daughter was simply gone. Detective Winters worked the case methodically, interviewing Claire's friends, tracking down anyone who might have seen her that evening, checking her phone records and bank statements for any unusual activity. Everything was normal. Too normal. Claire's car remained missing. That was perhaps the biggest mystery. If she'd been in an accident, the car should have been found. If she'd been abducted, where had the abduction taken place? The only thing Winters knew for certain was that Claire had been at Dr. Brennan's office at 5:20 p.m. and was gone by 6 p.m. What happened in that 40-minute window? Winters re-interviewed Jenny Morrison, Dr. Brennan's receptionist. Did you notice anything unusual that evening? Anything at all that seemed off? Jenny thought carefully. Not really. It was a normal day. Claire came in, waited in the reception area. Dr. Brennan called her back. I left like I always do when he says he'll lock up. He does that a couple times a week, stays late to catch up on paperwork. Did you hear anything from the examination room while Claire was there? Any raised voices, anything concerning? No, nothing like that. The walls are pretty thick though. Usually I can't hear what's going on in the exam rooms unless someone's really loud. Winters also checked the security camera footage. The camera above the front door showed Jenny leaving at 5:37 p.m. It showed nothing else. No footage of Claire leaving. But that wasn't necessarily suspicious. The camera had a limited field of view, pointed at the front entrance to catch potential break-ins. If Claire had left through the front door and walked directly to the parking lot, she would have been out of frame almost immediately. By early January 1999, the case had stalled. Despite intensive searching, no physical evidence of Claire Hartley had been found. Her bank account showed no activity after December 18. Her credit cards were unused. Her cell phone never came back online. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air, joining the mysterious disappearances that Vermont's Bennington Triangle was famous for decades earlier. The Bennington Triangle, a term coined by author Joseph Citro, referred to an area in southwestern Vermont where several people had vanished between 1945 and 1950. Now, nearly 50 years later, people in Stowe began whispering about curses, about the Green Mountains taking another victim. It was easier to believe in supernatural explanations than to accept that something terrible had happened to Claire in their safe, tight-knit community. Detective Winters didn't believe in curses or triangles. She believed in evidence, and she had none. Without a body, without witnesses, without any indication of where Claire had gone after leaving Dr. Brennan's office, the case couldn't move forward. By February 1999, it was officially classified as a cold case. The file remained open, but active investigation ceased. The Hartley family was left with questions that had no answers. Dr. Brennan continued his practice. He attended Claire's memorial service, held in April 1999 at the Stowe Community Church. He sat in the back, weeping quietly as Robert Hartley gave a eulogy for a daughter whose body had never been found. After the service, dozens of people thanked the doctor for his tireless efforts during the search. He'd given so much of himself, they said. He was a true pillar of the community. The years passed slowly for the Hartley family. Robert and Linda's marriage crumbled under the weight of grief and unanswered questions. They divorced in 2002. Robert moved to Maine, unable to stay in a town filled with memories of Claire. Linda remained in Stowe, running the bed and breakfast alone, never giving up hope that somehow, someday, she'd learn what happened to her daughter. Dr. Brennan continued his practice until 2015, when he retired at age 71. The town threw him a retirement party at the Rusty Nail, Stowe's oldest bar. Over 200 people attended. They presented him with a plaque, Dr. Michael Brennan, 47 years of dedicated service to Stowe, Vermont. Speeches were given, stories told, tears shed. The doctor had delivered over 600 babies, treated thousands of patients, saved countless lives. He was Stowe's living treasure. In retirement, Dr. Brennan remained active in the community. He volunteered at the public library, served on the town planning commission, and mentored young doctors at the University Medical Center in Burlington. He seemed content, a kind old man who dedicated his life to helping others. No one suspected that behind his gentle smile and wire-rimmed glasses lived a secret so dark it would eventually tear Stowe apart. The breakthrough came in March 2024, 26 years after Claire Hartley's disappearance. It started not in Stowe, but in a forensics laboratory in Waterbury, where Vermont State Police stored evidence from cold cases. A new initiative, funded by federal grants, aimed to apply modern DNA technology to old cases. Detective Winters, now 52 and nearing retirement, had advocated for Claire's case to be re-examined. The evidence was minimal. Claire's car had never been found. No crime scene existed. But there was one item that had been overlooked in the original investigation: a single strand of hair found on the sleeve of Dr. Brennan's white medical coat, the one he'd been wearing the day Claire disappeared. The coat had been collected as part of routine evidence gathering, but in 1998, DNA testing was expensive and time-consuming, and there'd been no reason to suspect Dr. Brennan of any wrongdoing. The coat had been sealed in an evidence bag and stored away, forgotten. In 2024, forensic technician Amanda Rice was working through cold case evidence when she found the coat. "It's a long shot," she told her supervisor, "but we can extract DNA from a single hair now. If there's any foreign DNA on this coat, we'll find it." The hair was analyzed using advanced sequencing technology. It didn't belong to Dr. Brennan. It belonged to a female, and the profile was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database. No match. But Rice didn't stop there. She uploaded the profile to GenealogyMatch, a public genealogy database where millions of people had voluntarily submitted their DNA to trace ancestry and find relative. Within 2 weeks, GenealogyMatch returned a hit: a third cousin match to someone named Patricia Kendall, who lived in Burlington. Rice contacted Kendall, explained she was working on a cold case, and asked if she'd be willing to provide additional family information. Kendall agreed and provided a detailed family tree. Working backward through generations, Rice and genealogist Martha Flynn identified a common ancestor: Claire Hartley's great-great-grandmother. The DNA on Dr. Brennan's medical coat belonged to Claire Hartley herself. Detective Sarah Winters, now in charge of the cold case unit, stared at the report in disbelief. The hair was on his coat. Claire's hair. But he said she left his office. He said he watched her walk to her car. "Maybe it transferred during the examination?" suggested Officer Martinez, who was assisting with the case. "Maybe," Winters replied, but her instincts told her otherwise. Or maybe she never left that office at all. The investigation shifted into a new phase, one that would require extreme discretion. Dr. Brennan was now 80 years old, still living in his Victorian house on Mountain Road. He was beloved in Stowe, a living legend. Accusing him of involvement in Claire's disappearance would require ironclad evidence. A single hair, while significant, wasn't enough. Winters requested a search warrant for Dr. Brennan's home and the former medical office, which was now a real estate agency. The warrant was granted, but Judge Morrison advised caution. "Michael Brennan is a respected member of this community. If you're wrong about this, you'll destroy an innocent man's reputation. Make sure you're right." On March 15, 2024, Vermont State Police executed the warrant. A team of 12 officers and forensic technicians arrived at Dr. Brennan's house at 6 a.m. The doctor answered the door in his bathrobe, confused and frightened. Dr. Brennan, we have a warrant to search your property, Winters said, her voice professional but not unkind. What? Why? I don't understand. It's related to an ongoing investigation. I need you to step outside, please. The search of the house took 8 hours. Officers went through every room, every closet, every drawer. In the basement, they found boxes of old medical records, patient files that should have been destroyed according to HIPAA regulations. Among them were Claire Hartley's complete medical records, dating back to when she was 6 years old. But it was in a small locked room in the basement, hidden behind a false wall that appeared to be part of the foundation, that they found the nightmare. The room was approximately 8 by 10 feet, concrete walls, a drain in the floor, no windows. A metal examining table sat in the center, still bearing old leather restraints. A cabinet held surgical instruments, anesthesia equipment, and dozens of bottles of medications, many expired. On a shelf, wrapped in plastic, was clothing. A green fleece jacket with the University of Vermont logo. Hiking boots, size 7 women's. A pair of jeans. A small backpack. All items matched the description of what Claire Hartley had been wearing the day she disappeared. Forensic teams photographed everything, logged every item, collected samples from every surface. The room appeared to have been scrubbed clean multiple times over the years, but luminol testing revealed traces of blood. DNA analysis would take time, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Brennan was arrested at 3 p.m. that same day. He said nothing, invoking his right to an attorney. As police led him from his house in handcuffs, neighbors gathered on the street, stunned and disbelieving. "There must be some mistake," said Martha Chen, who lived next door. Dr. Brennan would never hurt anyone. He's a doctor. The news spread through Stowe like wildfire. The local radio station interrupted regular programming to announce the arrest. Dr. Michael Brennan, retired Stowe physician, has been arrested in connection with the 1998 disappearance of Claire Hartley. The words seemed impossible, a surreal nightmare. Linda Hartley received the call from Detective Winters at 4:30 p.m. She collapsed, her legs giving out beneath her. After 26 years of questions, she finally had an answer. But the answer was so much worse than she'd imagined. Not a random stranger, not an accident, not a terrible twist of fate. It was Dr. Brennan, the man who'd delivered Claire at birth. The man who'd given her vaccinations, treated her childhood illnesses, written her college recommendation. The man she'd trusted implicitly. The man who'd comforted Linda during the darkest days after Claire vanished. The interrogation of Dr. Brennan took place over 3 days. His attorney, a public defender named Thomas Walsh, advised him to remain silent, but on the 3rd day, something broke. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was a desire to finally unburden himself after 26 years. Dr. Brennan began to talk. His confession, recorded and later presented in court, was clinical and terrifying in its lack of emotion. He spoke about Claire's appointment on December 18, 1998, as if describing a medical procedure. "She came in with a sore throat," he said, his voice flat. "Jenny left like she usually did. Claire was in examination room too. I gave her the throat exam, diagnosed pharyngitis, all standard. But then, as I was writing the prescription, I looked at her and I couldn't let her leave." "Why?" Detective Winters asked. "I had been watching her grow up for years. She'd become so beautiful. That day, in the exam room, wearing jeans and that green jacket, I made a decision." "What decision?" "To keep her." The words hung in the air, chilling in their simplicity. Dr. Brennan explained that he'd offered Claire a glass of water, which he'd laced with a sedative. Within minutes, she'd become drowsy, confused. He'd helped her to the basement, to the hidden room he'd constructed years earlier, anticipating this moment. He'd restrained her on the examination table. What happened next? Winters forced herself to ask. I kept her there for 3 days. I'd go down between patients, check on her. I gave her more sedatives to keep her compliant. I thought I could make her understand that she'd eventually accept the situation. But she kept fighting, kept screaming when the sedatives wore off. And then, Dr. Brennan's voice remained steady, disturbingly calm. On the 3rd day, December 21st, she managed to partially free one arm while I was changing her for. She scratched me, drew blood. She was crying, begging me to let her go. She said she wouldn't tell anyone, promised she'd never speak of it. But I couldn't risk that. I increased the sedative dosage. Too much. Her breathing became shallow, then stopped. I tried to revive her, perform CPR, but it was too late. She was gone. What did you do with her body? I wrapped her in plastic sheeting. That night, after midnight, I loaded her into my car. I drove to Smugglers Notch, to one of the old limestone caves in the mountains. I buried her deep inside, covered the entrance with rocks. No one would ever find her there. The confession was detailed enough to be credible, horrifying enough to shatter Stowe's sense of safety forever. Forensic teams were immediately dispatched to Smugglers Notch, a mountainous area about 15 miles from Stowe, known for its caves and difficult terrain. After 4 days of searching, they found the cave Dr. Brennan had described. Deep inside, beneath rocks and decades of sediment, they found human remains wrapped in degraded plastic sheeting. DNA testing confirmed the remains were Claire Hartley's. On March 25, 2024, Linda Hartley was able to bury her daughter. The funeral at Stowe Community Church was attended by over 500 people. 26 years of waiting, of not knowing, of hoping against hope, had finally ended. But closure brought no peace, only a different kind of pain. The trial of Dr. Michael Brennan began in October 2024. The prosecution presented the overwhelming evidence. Claire's DNA on his medical coat, her clothing found in his basement, his own confession, and her remains discovered exactly where he'd said they'd be. The defense attempted to argue that the confession had been coerced, that an 80-year-old man had been manipulated into admitting to something he didn't do. But the physical evidence was irrefutable. The most damaging testimony came from forensic pathologist Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who'd examined the hidden room in Brennan's basement. This wasn't a hasty crime of opportunity, she told the jury. This room was constructed deliberately, carefully. The soundproofing, the reinforced door, the medical equipment. Dr. Brennan had been planning this for years. Claire Hartley may have been his first victim, but the evidence suggests she might not have been his last. That statement sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Investigators were now looking at other unsolved disappearances in Vermont over the past 3 decades, trying to determine if Dr. Brennan had claimed other victims. The investigation was ongoing, but the speculation alone was enough to traumatize Stowe's community even further. On November 12, 2024, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and unlawful restraint. Dr. Michael Brennan, now 80 years old, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read, sitting perfectly still in his chair, staring straight ahead. Linda Hartley was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. She stood before the court, her voice shaking but clear. Dr. Brennan, you delivered my daughter. You held her in your hands when she was seconds old. You watched her grow up. You were supposed to protect her, to heal her. Instead, you took everything from her. You took her future, her dreams, her life. And you took 26 years from me. 26 years of not knowing, of hoping, of searching. You sat in my home and comforted me while you knew exactly where she was. That level of cruelty is beyond my comprehension. I hope you spend every remaining day of your life thinking about what you did. Dr. Brennan was transferred to Northern State Correctional Facility, Vermont's maximum security prison. At his age, it's unlikely he'll live long enough to serve even a fraction of his sentence. But that provided little comfort to those he'd betrayed. The impact on Stowe was profound and lasting. The community that had prided itself on trust, on neighborly bonds, on the safety that comes from everyone knowing everyone, now questioned everything. Parents wondered if they'd ever really known the people they'd trusted with their children. Patients who'd been treated by Dr. Brennan for decades felt violated, betrayed. How many times had they sat in his examination room, vulnerable and trusting, while he harbored such darkness? The medical office building was purchased by the town and demolished in January 2025. The lot remains empty, a painful reminder that no one wants to build on. Dr. Brennan's Victorian house was seized by the state, sold at auction, and also demolished. The community wanted no physical reminders of what had happened there. But memories can't be demolished. Stowe's identity had been built on trust and community, and Dr. Brennan had weaponized that trust for his own depravity. The psychological scars will take generations to heal. Therapists in the area reported a significant increase in anxiety and trust-related issues among residents. People who'd lived in Stowe their entire lives suddenly felt like strangers in their own town. The investigation into whether Dr. Brennan had other victims continued. Cold case files from across Vermont were reviewed, looking for disappearances that might be connected to him. 3 cases showed potential links: a 22-year-old woman who disappeared in 1985, a 17-year-old girl missing since 1993, and a 25-year-old hiking enthusiast who vanished in 2004. All had been patients of Dr. Brennan. All had disappeared under circumstances that could theoretically connect to him. But without confessions or physical evidence, these cases remained speculative. Dr. Brennan refused all interview requests from investigators, journalists, and psychologists. He spent his days in solitary confinement, requested for his own safety after other inmates learned of his crimes. Prison officials reported that he read medical journals, kept to himself, and showed no remorse or interest in discussing his actions. For Linda Hartley, Brennan's conviction brought a complicated mix of emotions. "I finally know what happened to Claire," she said in an interview 6 months after the trial. "But knowing doesn't make it better. It doesn't bring her back. And it doesn't erase the 26 years I spent trusting the man who killed her. I remember thanking him for helping search for her. I remember him holding my hand at her memorial service. Those memories make me sick now." Claire's story became a catalyst for changes in how missing persons cases are handled in Vermont. The state legislature passed the Claire Hartley Act in 2025, which mandates that all physical evidence from missing persons cases be preserved indefinitely and re-examined with new technology every 5 years. The law also requires more rigorous background checks for medical professionals and stricter oversight of medical practices. Vermont's progressive approach to justice, its emphasis on restorative practices and community healing, was tested by this case. How do you restore trust when it's been so fundamentally violated? How do you heal a community that learned its most trusted member was its greatest threat? There are no easy answers. The Stowe Community Church established a memorial garden for Claire, a quiet space with native Vermont plants and a simple stone marker bearing her name and dates: Claire Elizabeth Hartley, 1979 to 1998. The garden has become a place of reflection not just for Claire, but for all victims of violence, a reminder that trust must be earned, not assumed, and that evil can wear the most ordinary faces. Dr. Brennan's medical license was permanently revoked, though the action was symbolic given his imprisonment. The Vermont Board of Medical Practice launched an investigation into whether any warning signs had been missed over his 47-year career. They found none. By all accounts, he'd been an exemplary physician, competent and caring. The disconnect between his professional persona and his private actions remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Psychologists who studied the case noted that Dr. Brennan exhibited characteristics of a highly organized predator, someone who could compartmentalize their actions, maintain a public facade for decades, and feel no guilt or empathy for their victims. He saw Claire as an object to possess, not a human being, explained Dr. Richard Foster, a forensic psychologist who consulted on the case. The fact that he'd known her since childhood, that he'd literally held her as a newborn, made his crime even more incomprehensible. There was no empathy, no recognition of her humanity. That's what makes cases like this so terrifying. The predator doesn't look like a monster. He looks like your trusted family doctor. The revelation about Dr. Brennan forced many in Stowe to confront uncomfortable questions about their own judgment. How had they missed it? Were there signs they'd ignored? Several former patients came forward after his arrest with stories that, in hindsight, seemed troubling. A woman named Rachel Stevens recalled feeling uncomfortable during an examination in the late 1990s when Dr. Brennan had made what she thought was an odd comment about her appearance. She'd dismissed it at the time, not wanting to seem paranoid. Now she wondered if she'd been in danger. Another former patient, Jennifer Walsh, remembered that Dr. Brennan had always seemed particularly attentive to young women in their late teens and early 20s. He'd spend extra time with them, ask lots of questions about their personal lives, she said. At the time, I thought he was just being thorough, genuinely interested in his patients' well-being. Now I realize he was evaluating them, selecting potential victims. These revelations led to a broader conversation about medical ethics and the power dynamics inherent in doctor-patient relationship. The Vermont Medical Society issued new guidelines emphasizing the importance of never being alone with patients during examinations, of having staff present at all times, and of creating systems where inappropriate behavior could be reported without fear of retaliation. The case also highlighted the limitations of community-based policing in small towns. Stowe's police department, with its handful of officers, had been ill-equipped to investigate a sophisticated crime by a respected community member. The tendency to trust known figures, to dismiss suspicions as impossible, had allowed Dr. Brennan to operate undetected for decades. This led Vermont State Police to establish better protocols for assisting small departments with serious crimes and for ensuring that no suspect, regardless of their standing in the community, was above scrutiny. For Detective Sarah Winters, solving Claire's case after 26 years brought mixed emotions. "I'm grateful we finally got answers for the Hartley family," she said at her retirement ceremony in 2025. "But I can't help thinking about all the years Claire's remains were in that cave while Dr. Brennan walked free. Every time he delivered a baby, treated a patient, received community accolades, Claire was in that cave. That's a failure of our system, of our assumptions about who can and can't be a criminal. We have to do better." The forensic technician who'd found Claire's DNA, Amanda Rice, became a vocal advocate for funding cold case investigations. "Technology advances every year," she told a legislative committee. "DNA analysis that was impossible in 1998 became routine by 2024. How many other cases are sitting in evidence rooms, waiting for technology to catch up? How many families are still searching for answers that we already have the tools to find? We owe it to victims and their families to never stop investigating." Linda Hartley channeled her grief into activism, working with other families of missing persons to establish a support network and advocacy group. "For 26 years, I lived in limbo," she told members of the group. "Not knowing is a special kind of torture. You can't grieve properly because there's always that tiny hope your loved one will walk through the door. The answer I finally got was terrible, but it was an answer. I could finally begin to heal. I want to help other families get those answers, no matter how painful they might be. The Hartley family's bed and breakfast, which Linda had run alone for so many years, was sold in 2025. She couldn't stay in Stowe anymore, couldn't live in a town where every street corner held memories of Claire, where the medical office that had been Claire's tomb still appeared in her nightmares even though the building was gone. Linda moved to Burlington to be closer to her sister and started volunteering at a crisis center, using her own experience to help others navigate trauma. Robert Hartley, who'd been living in Maine since the divorce, returned to Vermont for Claire's funeral and stayed for the trial. He and Linda reconciled enough to stand together as they watched Dr. Brennan be sentenced. After the trial, Robert wrote a memoir about his experience, titled The Trust We Keep: A Father's Search for Justice. The book detailed his years of searching for Claire, the impact on his marriage and mental health, and the ultimate betrayal by someone he'd trusted implicitly. It became a regional bestseller and sparked conversations about how communities process trauma and betrayal. The University of Vermont, where Claire had been a student, established the Claire Hartley Memorial Scholarship for environmental science majors. Each year, a student passionate about conservation and Vermont's natural environment receives funding to continue the work Claire had dreamed of doing. The scholarship serves as a reminder that Claire was more than a victim. She was a young woman with aspirations, talents, and a future that was stolen from her. Stowe itself underwent a period of collective soul-searching. Town meetings were held to discuss how the community could heal and what lessons could be learned. Some residents argued for moving forward, not dwelling on the past. Others insisted that forgetting would dishonor Claire's memory. The debates were passionate and sometimes divisive, but ultimately the community decided on a middle path, acknowledging what happened, learning from it, but not letting it define Stowe's identity forever. The town commission approved a small memorial in the village green, a simple stone with an inscription, "In memory of Claire Hartley and all victims of violence. May we always remember that trust must be paired with vigilance, and that community safety requires constant attention, not comfortable assumptions." The inscription reflected a hard-won wisdom. Vermont's progressive values of community trust and restorative justice were not wrong, but they needed to be balanced with realistic acknowledgement that predators exist and often hide in plain sight. The challenge was maintaining the warmth and openness that made Vermont communities special while also protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit that trust. Dr. Brennan's case became a fixture in criminal justice curricula, studied as an example of how respected professionals can commit heinous crimes while maintaining a facade of normalcy. Law enforcement agencies across the country reviewed their own cold cases, looking for similar patterns where trusted community members might have been overlooked as suspects simply because of their status. The DNA technology that solved Claire's case continued to advance. By 2025, genetic genealogy had become a standard tool in cold case investigations, solving dozens of cases across the United States that had been dormant for decades. For families who'd waited years for answers, this technology represented hope. For criminals who thought they'd gotten away with their crimes, it represented an inevitable reckoning. In the Vermont State Prison, Dr. Brennan spent his days in isolation, his health declining. Prison medical records indicated he was suffering from early-stage dementia, his mind slowly deteriorating. There was a certain poetic justice in that. A man who'd used his medical knowledge to harm rather than heal, now losing that knowledge piece by piece as his brain failed him. Whether he retained enough cognitive function to feel remorse for his actions was unclear and, to many, irrelevant. The question of whether Dr. Brennan had other victims remained unanswered. The three cases that showed potential connections, the women who disappeared in 1985, 1993, and 2004, were all re-examined with renewed urgency. Investigators searched the caves at Smugglers Notch more extensively, looking for additional remains. They found nothing definitive, but the searches continued. If Dr. Brennan had killed others, Their families deserved the same answers Linda Hartley had finally received. Former FBI profiler Marcus Webb, who consulted on the case, believed there were likely other victims. Predators like Brennan don't typically start and stop with one victim, Webb explained. The planning that went into Claire's case, the hidden room in his basement, suggests this wasn't an impulsive act. He'd been fantasizing about this, preparing for it, and given that he practiced medicine for 47 years, had access to countless vulnerable patients, and clearly lacked any moral restraint, it's statistically probable he offended multiple times. This theory haunted the families of other missing women in Vermont. Every unsolved disappearance now carried the shadow of possibility. Could Dr. Brennan have been responsible? DNA evidence from the other cases was being re-examined, compared to materials found in Brennan's home and the hidden basement room. The work was painstaking and might take years to complete, but investigators were committed to finding answers. The community of Stowe slowly began to rebuild its sense of identity. New families moved to town, attracted by the natural beauty and small-town atmosphere, unaware of or choosing to look past the darkness that had been revealed. Longtime residents struggled to reconcile their memories of Dr. Brennan the healer with Dr. Brennan the killer. Some succeeded in compartmentalizing, others left town, unable to live with the cognitive dissonance. The local newspaper, the Stowe Reporter, published a series of articles examining how communities recover from betrayal by trusted figures. They interviewed residents of other towns that had experienced similar revelations, places where priests, coaches, or civic leaders had been exposed as predators. The common thread was that healing took time, often years, and required acknowledging the pain rather than suppressing it. One particularly poignant interview was with Sarah Morrison, who'd been Dr. Brennan's receptionist for 15 years. "I worked with him every day," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I scheduled Claire's appointment. I saw her in the waiting room. I left the office that night thinking everything was normal. How did I not see? How did I not know? I've asked myself that question 10,000 times. The guilt is overwhelming, even though intellectually I know it wasn't my fault. He fooled all of us. That was his skill, his weapon. He knew how to be exactly what we expected him to be." Sarah's guilt was shared by many in Stowe. Parents who'd brought their daughters to Dr. Brennan felt they'd put their children in danger. Colleagues who'd worked with him in medical settings wondered if they'd missed warning signs. Friends who'd socialized with him felt complicit in maintaining his cover. This collective guilt became part of the community's healing process, discussed in support groups and therapy sessions, slowly processed and released. The Stowe Community Church, where Dr. Brennan had been a member for over 30 years, held a special service of lament and healing 6 months after his conviction. Pastor David Richardson addressed the congregation with unusual directness. "We are angry, we are hurt, we feel betrayed by someone we trusted. These feelings are valid. But we cannot let them consume us. Michael Brennan made his choices. We are not responsible for his evil. Our responsibility is to each other, to rebuild trust carefully and wisely, to support those who are hurting, and to ensure nothing like this ever happens again in our community." The service included testimonials from people whose lives had been affected by the case. Linda Hartley spoke, her voice shaking but determined. Claire loved this town. She loved the mountains, the forests, the sense of community. "I don't want her memory to be solely about how she died. I want people to remember how she lived. She was kind, she was passionate about protecting the environment, she brought joy to everyone who knew her. Let's honor her by building a community that truly protects its young people, that listens when something feels wrong, that doesn't allow status or position to shield people from scrutiny." Her words resonated deeply. In the months that followed, Stowe implemented new policies for youth protection. Background checks became more rigorous. Systems were established for reporting concerns about adults in positions of authority. Training programs taught parents and children about recognizing grooming behavior and inappropriate relationship. These changes couldn't bring Claire back, but they could potentially prevent future tragedies. The case also sparked statewide reforms in Vermont. The legislature passed additional funding for cold case investigations, established stricter oversight of medical professionals, and created a task force to review protocols for investigating crimes by trusted community members. The reforms were named the Claire Hartley Public Safety Initiative, ensuring that her name would be associated not just with tragedy but with positive change. As 2025 progressed, the intensity of public focus on the case began to fade, replaced by new headlines and concerns. But for those directly affected, the Hartley family, the residents of Stowe, the former patients of Dr. Brennan, the case remained a defining event in their lives. It had fundamentally changed how they viewed trust, community, and safety. Detective Sarah Winters, in her final case file entry before retirement, wrote, "The Claire Hartley case reminds us that evil doesn't announce itself. It wears familiar faces, speaks in reassuring voices, and hides behind titles and reputations. Our job as investigators is to look past those facades, to follow evidence wherever it leads regardless of how uncomfortable it makes us, and to never assume anyone is above suspicion. I hope future investigators learn from the mistakes we made in 1998 when we accepted Dr. Brennan's story without sufficient scrutiny simply because he was a respected doctor. That assumption cost Claire Hartley 26 years of justice denied. The medical office where Claire had her last appointment, long since demolished, became the site of a small public garden. The town decided that rather than leaving the lot empty, a constant reminder of tragedy, they would create something living and beautiful. The Claire Hartley Memorial Garden featured native Vermont wildflowers, a small stream with a wooden bridge, and benches where people could sit and reflect. A tasteful plaque told Claire's story, ensuring that visitors would understand the garden's significance. The garden's dedication ceremony in June 2025 was attended by hundreds of people. Linda Hartley planted a sugar maple tree, Vermont's state tree, in Claire's memory. "This tree will grow here long after we're all gone," Linda said. "It will provide shade, shelter wildlife, and remind future generations that Claire existed, that she mattered, and that from tragedy can grow something beautiful." The case continued to generate interest nationally. True crime podcasts devoted episodes to Claire's story, examining how a trusted doctor became a killer and evaded detection for so long. The most popular podcast, Betrayed: The Claire Hartley Story, was downloaded over 2 million times. While some in Stowe found the national attention intrusive, others appreciated that it kept Claire's memory alive and educated people about the dangers of blindly trusting authority figures. Dr. Brennan's health continued to decline in prison. By late 2025, his dementia had progressed to the point where he no longer recognized visitors or seemed aware of his surroundings. Prison officials debated whether he was competent enough to remain in prison or should be transferred to a medical facility. The debate became moot when, in December 2025, Dr. Brennan suffered a massive stroke and died at age 81. His death brought no celebration, only a sense of finality. Linda Hartley released a brief statement. Dr. Brennan's death doesn't change what he did. It doesn't bring Claire back. But it does mean he'll never hurt anyone else, and for that I'm grateful. There was no funeral, no memorial service. Dr. Brennan's body was cremated and his ashes disposed of without ceremony, as he'd requested in a will written before his arrest. The investigation into his potential other victims continued even after his death. Forensic teams finished analyzing all materials from his home and the hidden room in his basement. In early 2026, they announced a breakthrough. DNA from the 1993 missing person case, 17-year-old Jennifer Mason, matched biological material found in Dr. Brennan's basement. Jennifer had been a patient of Dr. Brennan's, last seen leaving his office for what she'd told friends was a routine checkup. Jennifer's family, who'd spent 33 years not knowing what happened to their daughter, finally had answers. Like Claire, Jennifer's remains were eventually found in the caves at Smugglers Notch, buried in a different section than Claire but clearly hidden by the same person using the same methods. The discovery vindicated profiler Marcus Webb's theory that Dr. Brennan had multiple victims. The question now was whether there were others. The cases from 1985 and 2004 remained under investigation, but without definitive DNA matches, they couldn't be conclusively linked to Dr. Brennan. The forensic team expanded their search of the Smugglers Notch caves, using ground-penetrating radar and trained cadaver dogs, hoping to find additional remains that might bring closure to other families. As of mid-2026, the investigation remains open. Vermont State Police have established a dedicated phone line for anyone who believes they or someone they know might have been victimized by Dr. Brennan. Several women have come forward with stories of feeling uncomfortable during examinations, of the doctor making inappropriate comments or touching them in ways that didn't feel medically necessary. While these accounts don't constitute prosecutable crimes given Dr. Brennan's death, they paint a picture of a man who'd been testing boundaries and evaluating potential victims for decades. The case of Claire Hartley and Dr. Michael Brennan will be studied for years to come. It represents a perfect storm of factors that allowed a predator to operate undetected: a position of trust and authority, a small community with strong social bonds that made suspicion difficult, limited resources for investigating missing persons in rural areas, and technological limitations that prevented DNA analysis in 1998. But it also demonstrates that justice, while sometimes delayed, can eventually prevail. Claire's case was solved not through traditional detective work, though that played a role, but through the persistence of investigators who refused to let it remain forgotten and through scientific advances that made the impossible possible. The single hair on Dr. Brennan's medical coat, overlooked for 26 years, became the key that unlocked the truth. For the people of Stowe, Vermont, life continues. The town remains beautiful, nestled in the Green Mountains, a destination for skiers and hikers and people seeking the quintessential New England small-town experience. But beneath the scenic surface, residents carry the knowledge that their trust was weaponized against them, that the person they'd relied on most had betrayed them most completely. The lesson, painful as it is, has been learned. Trust must be earned through transparency and accountability, not assumed based on position or familiarity. Community bonds are precious, but they cannot be allowed to blind us to warning signs or prevent us from asking difficult questions. And when someone goes missing, particularly a young woman, the investigation must be thorough and relentless, following evidence even when it points toward the most unlikely suspects. Claire Hartley's story is ultimately about more than one young woman's murder. It's about how communities function, how trust operates, how evil hides, and how justice, through persistence and science, can eventually shine light into the darkest corners. Her name will be remembered not just as a victim but as a catalyst for change, for greater awareness, for reformed systems, and for the determination to ensure that no one else suffers the same fate. In the Claire Hartley Memorial Garden, the sugar maple Linda planted continues to grow, its roots reaching deep into Vermont soil, its branches reaching toward the big sky. It stands as a living memorial, a symbol of resilience and hope emerging from tragedy. Visitors sit on the benches beneath its growing canopy, some aware of the full story, others simply enjoying a peaceful moment in a beautiful place. The tree will outlive everyone involved in Claire's story. Long after Linda Hartley, Detective Winters, and all who knew Claire have passed away, the tree will remain, a silent witness to the fact that Claire Hartley existed, that she mattered, and that even in death, she changed her community for the better. That perhaps is the only comfort to be found in such a devastating story, that from the worst humanity can produce, sometimes comes the determination to be better, to build safer communities, and to ensure that those who are lost are never forgotten.